Welcome to Speculative Soapbox, where you hear the pitch straight from the author's mouth.
Well, welcome to another episode of the Speculative Soapbox. This week we have with us Brandon Draga he wrote the book, The Summerlark Elf. Welcome, Brandon.
Thanks, Steve. It's great to be on.
Oh, definitely. Could you please tell us a little bit about the book?
Absolutely. The long and short of it, I suppose, is that it's a story about an elven girl who is raised by humans as a human. Probably doesn't seem that interesting until you realize that she's growing up in a society where being an elf could get you killed.
It's an interesting take on it. What led to that world-building decision where elves are so hated?
You know, I was having a discussion with my younger sister who went to school for English and is a very avid reader.
Good.
And she was talking to me about all these kind of post-apocalyptic, kind of future-perfect right-wing novels that she's been reading. And I just thought it would be interesting to kind of put that into a fantasy setting.
Okay.
So the idea of having a society where all manner of magic and fey creatures are strictly forbidden is just, it seemed kind of interesting. And I just kind of ran with it.
Oh, that's kind of cool. So the post-apocalyptic right-wing books, do you know what books she was talking about?
I'm pretty sure she was talking about, stuff like the Divergent series, which admittedly is probably a bit fluffier than what a lot of the listeners will be into. But I mean, I'm not gonna dissuade anyone from reading.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with reading something completely different than your own worldview. It's actually very beneficial, I think. So what sets your book apart? Why should readers care?
Why should readers care? First of all, one thing of note is that it is definitely on the shorter side of fantasy novels. There's so many fantasy novels. It seems like you can't be taken seriously as a fantasy author, or a speculative fiction author for that matter, without writing something that's 250,000 words long. Mine is relatively short. It's very to the point, and I think that it's a very good way to break up, reading something like Patrick Rothfuss or George R. R. Martin. And even if you're not necessarily a fantasy reader, I know people who have read it just because they know me and they were interested, that genuinely enjoyed it. And the fact that it wasn't the size of a slab of concrete made it seem a little less daunting.
Well, I'd really like to hear that, actually, because that's one of the problems I have with speculative fiction, specifically fantasy, is how ridiculous some of the books turn out to be. Do you know how many words total your novel is?
I think it clocked in at just under 52,000. Yeah, 52,000.
Okay, yeah, so it was a real quick read.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. What are you reading right now?
Right now, it's funny. I actually posted an entry on my blog on my website about a week ago about how when you're working full-time and you're writing on the side, you don't get as much time to read as you like. So I'm actually listening to a lot of audiobooks.
Okay.
Recently, I've been really into the Earthsea saga, which are fantastic. They're not quite as flowery prose and as extensive in the prose as something like Tolkien, but there is still a very epic feel to Ursula K. Le Guin's writing that is fantastic. I recommend them to anybody.
That's cool. Yeah, I used to listen to a lot of audiobooks when I was working out, but mainly recently it's been all podcasts.
Well, I think podcasts are actually what got me into audiobooks.
Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
What are do you still listen to them?
The podcasts? Oh, yeah, definitely.
What are some of your main ones you subscribe to?
Let's see. My weekly my weekly three right now are Mondays. I'm listening to the Chainsaw Suit podcast, which is a comedy podcast hosted by Chris Straub, who writes Chainsaw Suit and Brood Hollow, and Mikey Newman, who is a designer at Gearbox Studios, and also a speculative fiction author. I'm listening to the Penny Arcade downloadable content podcasts, which are great because Jerry Holkins and Mike Rahulik are hilarious together, and just hearing them brainstorm is fantastic. And then on Wednesdays, there is a podcast called Nerd Poker, which is a comedy podcast in which Brian Posehn and a bunch of his friends within the industry get together and play second edition D&D.
Oh,
and
that's really cool.
Oh, that one's so much fun.
I actually saw Brian Posehn about a year ago at the Acme Comedy Club in Minneapolis. He's hilarious.
Oh god, I would kill to see any of those guys live. Yeah, he plays with Jerry Duggan, Blaine Capatch, Sarah Guzzardi. It's really, they brought Patton Oswalt on one time just for kicks.
Yeah.
They've been trying to get Vin Diesel on as kind of a running gag for a while now.
I forget that he plays D&D. That would be really interesting to have him come on, just completely wildly different Dungeons and Dragons player than you'd expect to see.
Yeah, which is funny because I think the more that a lot of this kind of nerd culture, we'll call it for lack of a more refined term, the more it kind of comes into the fray, the mainstream fray, you see that he's taking these roles. Like, he's voicing Groot in Guardians of the Galaxy, and he's so excited about it. So it's really cool to see these people who are, I think it's now more socially acceptable for them to kind of drop their image and really put themselves out there if they're into this kind of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's cool. Well, it sounds like with the Penny Arcade one, you're definitely a video game player. You should check out the Giant Bombcast, too. That's a really hilarious podcast.
Oh, yeah? Yeah.
Yeah. GiantBomb.com. It's a great website for video game reviews and just outright stupidity.
Nice.
So you mentioned you work full-time. What do you do?
I'm actually a pharmacist's assistant. I work at the local Costco's pharmacy. It's nothing too glamorous, but it pays the bills.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. I've heard pharmacies make quite a bit of money. I don't know about the pharmacist's assistant, but I know the pharmacist will make quite a bit.
Yeah, it's a living.
So, for your writing, are you part of a writing group? Do you do workshops, anything like that?
I haven't been able to. I mean, this novel was part of NaNoWriMo, which I did back in November. And I think I went to maybe one meetup over the course of the month. I tend to be a very kind of solitary writer. Like, I will spitball ideas off people, but when it's time to just sit down and write, I just hole myself up.
Yeah. Well, that's how you got to do it. So did you do the whole novel during November then?
The entire first draft, yeah.
That's a lot. So how many, let's see, you said you clocked in just under 52, right? So you're probably putting in, how many words a day is that?
I was putting in between 1,700 and 2,000 a day.
That's quite a bit. Jeez. So what are your hobbies outside of writing?
Well, I am very much into skateboarding. I have been since I was a kid. I am very much into music. I enjoy playing guitar.
Cool.
And I really love tabletop gaming. I'm currently starting up a new 4th edition D&D campaign that I've been really excited with and has served as a buffer on days when working on the second book in this series maybe isn't coming together as much as I'd like.
Yeah. No, that's cool. I wish I could find a group of people to play with. I just don't know. It's been so long since I played a normal D&D game. Pathfinder always looked like a ton of fun to me, but I haven't been able to find anyone to do it with.
Oh, there's tons of online resources. I know Reddit has a couple good subreddits for it, and even just doing, people use Google Hangouts and stuff like Roll20.net. I think there's even a Steam application that's coming out soon. That's, supposed to, yeah.
Yeah, actually, like back in my youth, I'm still pretty young, but when I was like 13, 14, I used to play in an online 2nd edition Dungeons and Dragons huge world campaign where there was multiple DMs, so there'd be different games scheduled each week, and that got it sucked up. It was like an MMO before MMOs really started happening, but it was a lot of fun.
God, to have that kind of time again.
Yeah, yeah. It's to think of how much stuff I could have gotten done if I had just focused on maybe schoolwork or what. You mentioned skateboarding. Where do you live?
I live in kind of a suburb town just northwest of Toronto, Ontario.
Okay, so you're kind of in the same boat as me then, where like half the year you can't even skateboard because it's snowing out.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And there's just been a complete cataclysm to the indoor skate parks in the GTA.
Oh
In
yeah.
the last 3 years, all but one have had just closed their doors for various reasons.
Jeez. Yeah, I haven't really been into skateboarding in quite a long time. Ever since I'm 6'5", and ever since I like had this massive growth spurt, my sense of balance is just gone. So I mean, plus I can't even fit my feet on a board comfortably anymore. So that just kind of ended at that when I got that big.
Yeah, no, my height capped at 5'9" back when I was like 17. So
Well, it works out for stuff like that. So, do you have any advice for other writers?
yeah, absolutely. And interestingly enough, it's actually advice that I took from, not personally, but from Jerry Holkins of Penny Arcade.
Yeah.
He had been charged to start working on a novel in the world that Mike Krahulik has been building, which is this fantasy world that he's created this deck building game for, which looks really interesting, called Thornwatch. So he wrote a blog post about it, and he said that the most daunting thing about writing a book is that you're sitting down and telling yourself that you're writing a book. Now, if you sit down and tell yourself that you're writing a chapter, that is a far less daunting task.
Yep.
So I think that's for anyone who writes, past all the usual advice that you hear, like write every day, take constructive criticism to heart. That for me was very much very poignant.
Yeah. Easier to stay on task when you're not looking at it as this giant project, just splitting it up into manageable bite-sized chunks.
Oh, that's absolutely it.
Yeah, yeah. When I first started the first novel, it just seemed like this insurmountable goal. It could not be done, but 1 hour a day, every day for a year, and suddenly I was like, oh wow, it's over. Now I start editing.
Yeah, exactly. Editing, the process everybody loves about writing.
Yeah, which turned out to be way harder than actually writing it in the first place.
It's so true.
So, where can people find your book?
Right now, people can find my book if they are in the GTA. There's a few shops actually that are carrying it. In my hometown, Brampton, there is a shop called Stadium Comics, which are the best local comic shop in the area, in my opinion. In Toronto proper, they can find it at the Silver Snail, Harry Tarantulas, and Baka Phoenix Sci-Fi and Fantasy Books. For anyone who's not in my area, the book's available on Amazon, both in hard copy and EPUB format. Yeah, and that pretty much sums it up.
So, is one of those stores called Harry Tarantula?
Yeah, it's a little comic board game nerd shop, just owned by the wildest guy. His name's Leon, and the place is just overrun with his cats.
I wouldn't even know what it was looking on the outside. I would think it's some kind of pet store.
Well, you walk in and you'd almost assume as much.
Well, yeah, there's cats everywhere. So, how can people follow you, Brandon?
They can follow me on Twitter at Brandon Draga. They can go to my website, brandondraga.com. They can find me on Goodreads if they feel so motivated. And yeah, there's contact info all over all those mediums.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for being on, Brandon. If anyone's interested in following me at my writing page, it is tjredig.com. My Twitter is at TJ Redig Writer. The Speculative Soapbox can be found at speculativesoapbox.com and on Twitter at @speculative_soap, because I didn't have enough room to write the whole thing. Brandon, once again, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much for having me, Teach. This was great.
Definitely.